Welcome to part 3 of the LGAP Standards Essentials Training session. In part 1, we were introduced to the language of LGAP, and in part 2, we looked at the 6 principles LGAP 1001, or the Animal Welfare and Management Standard, addresses. We also explored how you can look at what you are currently doing to demonstrate compliance with SCAS and how this can be applied under LGAP, as well as what you may need to consider during transition. This session will focus on the Management System Standard and the Chain of Custody Standard, followed by a review of what we covered throughout the whole session. LGAP 1002 is the Management System Standard under LGAP. This standard sets out requirements for the management system used by operators and facilities. It is applicable to exporter and importer operators, as well as feedlot, farm, and abattoir facilities. The requirements are structured to address the principle that the operator or facility has a management system suitable to the size and frequency of their operation that enables the consideration of risks, verifies conformity with the LGAP certification requirements, and allows for continual improvement of performance. This may be a standard which people think sounds more different to anything else under SCAS. Before I go into the detail, I want to look at what management system in general means. A management system is essentially a collection of processes, procedures, and practices that a business uses to ensure that it is meeting the requirements that are placed on it. Record keeping, or documented information as it is called, is a large part of a management system. SCAS already has a lot of management system requirements stated and inferred. For example, auditors will want to see records to demonstrate the SCAS animal welfare standard is being met. As we heard in the previous section, these records include standard operating procedures, work instructions, maintenance schedules, and evidence of training. LGAP takes many of the inferred management system requirements in SCAS and makes them clear. So why have a management system? It can actually be a powerful tool for your business. It provides consistency and monitoring so you can detect issues before they escalate. It helps with cause analysis so you can eliminate the cause of any issues and prevent reoccurrence. It provides a way to identify and manage risk and avoid undesirable consequences. And it enables continual improvement. As we've heard before, continual improvement is an important aspect of LGAP and focuses on incremental improvement in the way things are done over time. A management system fosters improvement through the presence and control of documents, the adherence to processes and the assessment of risk and controls to minimize or eliminate risk, the use of internal audits to detect issues before they become severe, the identification and treatment of non-conformities, regular reviews of the management system itself to identify areas of improvement. The Management System Standard can be considered the linchpin of LGAP. It brings together the other standards and is the tool you use to demonstrate conformity with requirements from the other standards. For example, the Management System Standard requires processes and procedures to be in place which support animal welfare outcomes provided in the Animal Welfare and Management Standard. The Management System Standard also underpins requirements in the Operator Chain of Custody Standard. For example, demonstrating the requirement from this standard that exported livestock have only been sent to and received by LGAP certified operators and facilities can be achieved using the records which would be kept as part of an organisation's management system. If we look at transitioning from SCAS to LGAP, this standard covers 5 broad topics. These relate to leadership, process risk and monitoring, documented information, internal auditing and corrective action, and management reviews. I will work through an example of each of these shortly, but if we take leadership and compare requirements under LGAP with what you may be doing in order to enable compliance with SCAS, you are probably looking at significant alignment with LGAP, and for some, this may be complete alignment. Process risk and monitoring does introduce new components around risk assessment at critical control points and monitoring these points to ensure ongoing conformity with LGAP. This was an area deemed critical through industry consultation, as there were concerns in relation to what occurred during the inter-audit gap, as we heard earlier in part 2 of this session. Looking at LGAP and SCAS, we would expect this to have less alignment for some. However, we also know that many organisations are already undertaking risk and monitoring activities similar to those required under LGAP in order to demonstrate SCAS compliance and protect their businesses. So for those organisations, this may be higher. As mentioned earlier, there are already many requirements in SCAS which relate to record keeping or documented information. So you may be meeting a significant number of the requirements related to this area under LGAP, if not more. You may be less familiar with internal auditing as well as management reviews. So these areas may require further consideration during transition, but for others, there may already be greater alignment. You should be familiar with the need to undertake corrective action if non-compliances under SCAS are identified. So this area under LGAP won't be new to you. We will go into more detail around these components and what is required shortly. So you can see that even though management system may sound new, there are areas which align with expectations under SCAS and what many may already be doing in order to demonstrate genuine compliance, all of which can be utilised when transitioning to LGAP. I'll now take you through each of these areas and explore the requirements in more detail. Let's have a look at leadership first. Under leadership, there is one requirement, which essentially says that whoever is in charge of the operator or facility will demonstrate leadership and commitment to fulfilling the LGAP certification requirements. It then provides 6 points which would indicate that such leadership and commitment exists. These points relate to things like making sure you have documented information, making sure people know what they have to do, making sure the right equipment and infrastructure is available, looking at what happens in the operation, particularly if there is a non-conformity, and fixing issues to ensure ongoing conformity. If you were to look at the list of points under this requirement, you would already need to be doing many of these under SCAS in order to ensure compliance. For example, you would need to ensure you have made the right restraint equipment available in an abattoir. That is a leadership commitment. The next area is process, risk, and monitoring. These actually relate to a number of different subsections within the standard, but when considered in combination, these requirements essentially mean you need to identify risks, have processes to manage these risks, monitor those processes, and verify the performance against the processes. Now let's have a look at these points in a bit more detail. If we look at identifying risks first, the reason for including risk under LGAP is that it is an opportunity to look at all of the areas in your operation that could affect your ability to remain certified. Then it's an opportunity to consider how you can avoid issues occurring and implement appropriate actions. This means having a look at what happens throughout your operation, but in particular at critical control points in the operation where there is a higher likelihood that a non-conformity could occur. For example, during loading, unloading, restraint, and slaughter. Now, this is not meant to be an onerous process. This is about thinking what could go wrong in my operation, which would impact my ability to remain certified. Where could these things go wrong? And how do I minimize the chance of these things going wrong or eliminate the reason for these things going wrong? Once you are aware of the risks in your operation, you can then develop processes which enable you to minimize or eliminate those risks. You should already have processes in place under SCAS to manage many of the risks your business may face, particularly at the critical control points such as loading and unloading. You may need to introduce new processes, for example, in relation to some of the aspects we heard about in LGAP 1001 for internal traceability activities, such as recording movement of animals within the site or checking that they have the appropriate identification. Once you've developed your processes, you then need to monitor that those processes are being adhered to and are working. That is, that they are meeting the requirements under LGAP. In particular, there is a linkage here with monitoring the targets in the Animal Welfare and Management Standard to ensure, for example, the number of animals slipping and falling during loading and unloading does not exceed the targets. This is an ongoing requirement for the operator or facility rather than solely occurring during the external audit. That's because monitoring is part of that self-checking process to ensure day-to-day conformity with the requirements is maintained. Animal welfare should be assured day to day, not audit to audit. Verifying performance means that you consider the results from monitoring your processes to ensure you are meeting the LGAP requirements. If we take the same example of monitoring slips and falls during loading and unloading, then your management system would verify that you were not exceeding the targets, or if you did, that you had identified the issue and taken steps to correct the issue. Not all of the requirements under the next section, which is documented information, apply to every operator or facility. We heard earlier that as a defined term under LGAP, documented information is any information required by an operator or facility. It can include records and other documents such as standard operating procedures and work instructions. It can be in hard copy or it may be in electronic form. IT systems and traceability systems and databases are a form of documented information. Overall, the intent of this section is to ensure there is documented information which is required by the standards, necessary to enable conformity, essential to effective implementation, and used to demonstrate conformity. This is not about paperwork for the sake of paperwork. This is about making sure what needs to be done to conform with the standards is understood and done, and that there is evidence to prove this. There are 3 requirements under management review, and many organisations are probably already doing this, but may call this a different name. This is an area where the term top management occurs, and remember that this means whoever directs or controls an operator or facility in relation to LGAP. What this section essentially requires is that you should review your operation at least every 12 months to identify areas requiring improvement so you can continue to conform with the LGAP certification requirements overall. Detail is then provided as to what should be considered when undertaking such a review. For example, looking at your past internal and external audit results and considering if the actions taken could be improved upon, and then actioning those improvements. For some, reviewing your management system regularly will be business as usual. For others, this is an ongoing opportunity to look at past performance and identify areas for improvement. It also means you'll pick up issues before they become critical. The remaining sections of the standard relate to internal auditing and corrective action, and can be found in sections 10 and 11 in the Management System Standard. Looking at these in combination, they are basically saying that you will need to undertake internal audits on a regular basis. And as we've heard in previous sessions, the frequency of the internal audits is specified by the risk rating allocated during external audits. As we've also heard before, regular internal auditing is a form of self-checking to make sure the way you operate remains in conformity with the LGAP certification requirements. It is expected through the internal audit process you would identify non-conformities, and this is considered an opportunity to address issues before they become severe. If a non-conformity was identified, then you would need to take action to fix the issue. Remember that non-conformities may be identified through internal or external audits, or as a result of feedback from the market or community. For those that have had non-compliances under SCAS in the past, the need to take action to correct the issue won't be new. The Animark IT Conformance System is the tool you use to undertake your internal audits and record your outcomes and corrective actions. The requirements under the Management System Standard work together and, as we heard earlier, underpin conformity with the remaining standards and therefore certification under LGAP. Let's have a look at how the requirements under this standard work together in conjunction with requirements from the other standards. Under the Animal Health section in LGAP 1001, there is a requirement for the operator or facility to monitor loading and unloading of livestock. The requirement then outlines targets which the monitoring is focused on, provides a sampling method through an annex, and specifies that if the targets are exceeded, then action is taken to fix the reason the targets were exceeded. If we then look at the Management System Standard, there is a requirement for there to be documented information in relation to processes for monitoring animal handling at loading and unloading, as well as through the site. Supporting this in the Management System Standard, there is also a requirement for monitoring and verification to be in place to measure and report on targets provided in the LGAP standards and demonstrate that any corrective action required is effective. Verification means proof that monitoring occurs and the item being monitored is performing as expected. Keeping this example in mind, we're now going to work through how all of the components in the Management System Standard work together. And we will use the unloading process in a facility in particular to see how this would work. In terms of leadership, the requirement for monitoring to occur would be something that is committed to by those responsible for the operator or facility, and the importance of this monitoring occurring would be communicated to all personnel involved in animal handling and unloading activities. The risk of animals slipping, falling, or vocalizing during unloading would be assessed by the operator or facility. For example, through an inspection of infrastructure and equipment and an assessment of the competencies of personnel involved. Processes required to minimize or eliminate these risks would be established. The organisation would also establish how many people are required to undertake these processes, as well as ensuring these people have the right competencies required. One of these people would also be given responsibility for monitoring activities during unloading against the targets for slips, falls, and vocalization in the Animal Welfare and Management Standard. Documented information would then be developed and made available to underpin the unloading activity. This would include having records to demonstrate who is responsible for these activities, work instructions related to how and when to undertake unloading activities, including monitoring, as well as recording templates. The people responsible for unloading and monitoring would be given the necessary work instructions and resources to enable them to do this task. For example, they would be given the monitoring template from the LGAP Management System Manual to use during unloading, so they can record any slips, falls, or vocalizations. Where the targets relating to slips, falls, and vocalizations were exceeded, then the documented information would also demonstrate any corrective action which occurred. Internal auditing would then consider the documented information, practices and processes we've just heard about, and assess the overall effectiveness of this holistic system to demonstrate conformity with the LGAP certification requirements. Internal auditors would look for evidence that handling and monitoring activity had occurred through assessing documented information. For example, they would look at records of transport arrivals and departures and ask to see records associated with monitoring activities for those arrivals and departures. It's important to note that the internal auditor would also undertake their own monitoring to ensure what they see on site reflects what the records indicate. If non-conformities were identified during unloading and monitoring activities, or during an internal or external audit, then corrective action would need to be taken to eliminate the cause of the non-conformity. And of course, documented information kept to demonstrate this correction or corrective action has occurred. The important aspect of this example in particular is not that a non-conformity has occurred because an animal slips, falls, or vocalizes during unloading, but rather that the facility has identified an issue through monitoring, made changes to practices, processes, or procedures to eliminate the reason animals slipped, fell, or vocalized, and has records to demonstrate this. Finally, at least every year, top management would review all of these components, being the processes, documented information, audit outcomes, and corrective actions, and assess performance, and implement changes where improvement can be made. So you can see that all of the components of an operator or facilities management system come together to underpin conformity with all of the LGAP certification requirements as a whole. At certain points, we have talked about how you would demonstrate your conformity with particular requirements to an auditor. This is what you rely on your management system for. It is important, however, to recognise that some requirements cannot simply be demonstrated using a piece of paper or a record. The auditor will also observe practices to verify that what they are seeing in the management system is actually what occurs day to day. Don't forget that Animark has a manual which includes a range of templates you can use to build a management system if you don't already have one. This will be available as a Word template from Animark, so you can work through and input your own information to make this your own management system. In addition, there is a guidance manual we've heard about previously that provides guidance for conforming with the requirements. And of course, there is the Animark IT Conformance System, which you use to undertake your internal audit, record outcomes, and corrective actions. So we have covered the management system standard, which looks at how the standard can be used to demonstrate conformity with the LGAP certification requirements as a whole. Our next section looks at the operator chain of custody standard. LGAP 1003 sets out requirements for operators' chain of custody. It applies to exporter and importer operators. The principle addressed in this standard is that the operator can demonstrate a commitment to the welfare, management, and traceability of animals in establishments throughout their supply chains. Remember, under SCAS, there were 4 principles: animal welfare, independent auditing, and traceability and control of livestock through the supply chain. The chain of custody standard under LGAP brings together the animal welfare, traceability, and control principles under SCAS in order to ensure regulatory requirements continue to be met. Chain of custody relates to demonstrating a commitment to the welfare of animals throughout the supply chain, demonstrating a commitment to comply with the legal requirements of the jurisdictions through which the supply chain operates, using and maintaining a system that results in the verifiable traceability of all animals throughout the supply chain until death, maintaining contingency arrangements for livestock throughout the supply chain, and taking action in the event of certain circumstances. And finally, fulfilling the requirements of LGAP 1002, or the Management System Standard. In order to demonstrate a commitment to animal welfare, an operator would only use LGAP certified facilities and downstream operators. We heard earlier how traceability and control is managed under LGAP. In terms of this requirement for operators, it means that they have a system or systems in place which links all of the downstream information and can verify the effectiveness of the system to trace animals. One of the other requirements under chain of custody is to maintain contingency arrangements for livestock throughout the supply chain and take action in the event of certain circumstances. For example, if there are significant adverse traceability or animal welfare outcomes, if there are changes in market access arrangements, or if certified operators or facilities that are relied upon within the operator's supply chain have their certification suspended or withdrawn. What this means is that you need to consider what would happen in case of these events and have plans ready to be acted upon. As we've heard before, one of the benefits of LGAP is its enhanced flexibility to trade, which helps operators fulfill this requirement. If we consider that an operator is meeting the requirement to use only certified operators and facilities, then their entire market comprises a network of these certified entities across a number of supply chains. At any time, there may be operators or facilities that have had their certification suspended or withdrawn, or there could be changes in market access requirements. LGAP allows trade to continue through the flexibility of the program, and it is in this way that an operator is able to demonstrate that they have contingency arrangements in place. So looking at what we've covered in this session, the three main standards under LGAP are interconnected and the requirements work together. We've heard that the management system standard can be considered the linchpin of LGAP as it brings together the other standards and is the tool you use to demonstrate conformity with requirements from the other standards. We also heard that there is overlap between SCAS and LGAP. However, we can't make a direct comparison because the two programs have been structured differently, and LGAP was specifically charged with addressing some of the weaknesses in SCAS. It may also be that there is greater overlap for some businesses depending on their approach to SCAS compliance. We heard that existing practices, processes, and procedures can be used to transition from SCAS to LGAP, and that Animark also has a range of resources available if you find there are gaps which need to be closed in order to become certified and maintain certification under LGAP. That brings this session to an end, and it brings the entire session 3 to an end. Thank you for your time and attention, and I hope this has provided you with more detail about the application of the LGAP standards in your business. To access any of these sessions, short videos or other resources, please visit the Animark website at www.animark.com.au.